I picked up this iMac here for nearly nothing, but it doesn't work. And I'm trying to figure out what I should do with it. And I think my kitty wants me to make her a new cat house out of it. So why don't we get started on that?
So the first thing you need to do is turn it over and remove the screws out of the bottom. Normally you wouldn't need to remove all of these screws just to work on the machine, but if you're going to gut the whole thing, then you do. Okay, at this point you can remove the main cover on the bottom. You could probably use that handle, but I forgot about it at the time. One interesting thing I noticed is that it uses a standard 15-pin video connector. This gives me some interesting ideas for modding an iMac with a Raspberry Pi, for example. Okay, so next you'll need to remove the power connector and this other cable here. Now we can start unscrewing the entire logic board assembly. Eventually you can pull the entire assembly out. Next, you can pop out this front bezel for the speakers. Underneath you'll find some more screws to remove, and also some more screws in the back area. You should be able to pop the bottom plastic piece off now. Okay, next you'll need to pop off the front bezel carefully using a flat tip screwdriver. Just remember that brute force is not the answer. You actually have to work the plastic at just the right angles to make this work without breaking. Okay, the front bezel is off. Okay, now you have these little covers, which are for cosmetic reasons only. Underneath are some screws that you'll need to remove. Okay, now you should finally be able to remove the main plastic cover for the machine. Now, you'll have an exposed CRT, and this can be kind of dangerous, so it's important to discharge the CRT before going any further. Basically, what you want to do is connect the screwdriver to one of the metal grounding surfaces. It's best if you wear rubber gloves. Next, you'll need to work the screwdriver under the suction cup until it touches the metal part of the anode. If there is a charge, you'll hear a pop. This unit was already discharged, so there was really nothing to hear. You can go ahead and work the connector off. Just to be sure, you can rub the connector on the ground and then also ground out the anode on the tube again. Okay, back to disassembling. You can take out all of these screws that connect the CRT to the front of the system. There are several on each side. Then unplug these cables from the power button circuit board, and also don't forget the two speaker cables. And then on the opposite side there's a microphone cable. At this point you should be able to remove this supportive piece of plastic. Okay, so you may want to clean the plastic at this point. Since there are no electronics involved, you can do it however you want. You could hose it off with the garden hose or whatever. Okay, so I went ahead and started reassembling the puzzle of plastic pieces so that I could see what I had to work with here. So here's what I ended up with. I could immediately see a few things that needed to be done. First of all, I noticed that I could unscrew this piece here, which used to be to protect the ports. That freed up some interior space, and I could also tell that these two support structures are taking up a lot of space inside. I'm going to need to cut these out. Also, there's this ugly hole in the front, so I need to take the bezel off the CD-ROM and glue it on. Okay, so I used a Dremel with a cutting wheel on it to cut out these pieces that I don't want, and they seem to come out without too much difficulty. So the next thing I did was take the bezel off the CD-ROM drive. It was just a matter of removing these two screws and then popping the bezel off. Now, as you can see, there's basically nothing to hold this thing in place, so I had to improvise a little bit. I used some duct tape to hold the bezel in place, and then I used a silicone adhesive to permanently seal it. It doesn't look pretty, but nobody will ever see this part of it. After 12 hours, I pulled the tape off, and it appears to be held on well.
Okay, so now that I'm done gutting the machine, there are still two problems that need to be solved. The first problem is that there's no cushion inside. Now, my wife runs a craft business, and so she's going to take care of making a special cushion just for this. So we'll get to that in a minute. The second problem I got to deal with is the fact that there's no weight in the front of this anymore. That big old heavy CRT is gone. So if the cat were to get into it and step very far to the back, the thing would just fall right over. So I knew that I was going to need to build some kind of stand or something for this. So I got the idea to go ahead and just build something really awesome. So we'll get to that.
So my wife got to working to making a custom cushion. She started by cutting out a piece of foam. After it was meticulously cut to the exact shape of the inside of the iMac, she began the process of covering it. The cover is basically cut out to a similar but larger shape, and the trick is that it's two layers and the cushion goes on the inside. Then she created a bunch of little slices and then tied all the pieces together. And here's the finished product. And while she was working on that, I was over at the Geek Pub's woodworking shop building a base. I started with a regular old 2x4. I glued them together and followed that up with some screws. This will create my scratching post that the iMac will sit on. And then I used a bandsaw to cut out a perfectly shaped base for the iMac to sit on. After I assembled the wood, I wanted to carpet the bottom, and I had some scrap carpet left over, so I cut a perfectly shaped hole right in the middle, and then I started the process of gluing it down. I used this heavy battery backup to hold the carpet down in places while the glue dried. And of course, no scratching post is complete without rope, so I tightly wrapped this rope around the post and glued the corners as I went. Okay, so the last thing I really needed to do was to attach the iMac to the top of the stand. Now, I had already created these indentions for the feet to rest in, but I needed something to really hold it down, so I drilled some holes in some strategic locations and screwed it down to the stand. And finally, the finished product. Okay, now it's time for the cats to test it. Now, I tried cat number 1, and she really didn't seem that interested. So, I tried cat number 2, and she loved it. She spent quite a lot of time laying in it on the first day.